To make our gearbox, we want to first determine how big we need to make it. And I've got my little mini album out here. I've removed the tags, but I've left this little charm clip on here because I want to allow room for that. So first I'm going to measure my book. I want to allow about a ½ inch bigger than the book so that there's room to pull it out. So when I measure that width, then that would be 4 3/4. And then for the length, including that little clip up there at the top, that would be 7 1/4. And for the height, I think 2 inches will work. I'm going to use double chipboard construction, and I know that for my chipboard, when I double it up, it measures just about 1/8 of an inch wide. So if I'm going to put this together by having a base piece of double chipboard and then build the walls on top of it, that means that I need to allow for 1/4 of an inch. That's 2 times 1/8 on both the width and the length. So my base piece will be 4 3/4 plus 1/4, so 5 by 7 1/4 plus 1/4, which would be 7 1/2. And then for my lengths, I think I'll keep them the same length, so I'll just cut them 2 by 7 1/4. And for the widths, I need to increase that 1/4 of an inch to make up to that 5, so I'll cut them at 2 by 5. And that will allow me to make my box. So I'll get these pieces all cut. I'm going to cut doubles, so I will need 4 the length, 4 at the width, and 2 of the base. So I'll get those cut and glued up, and then I'll be back. So I've cut all my chipboard, and I've glued it up into double thicknesses here and let it sit under some weights to dry thoroughly. And now I'm ready to construct, and I'll start by the short sides, or the exact length of the base. So I'll put one short side on, and then take each of the longer sides and butt that up against that shorter side. And then finally I'll put this last short piece to the right on top, and then let that set up and thoroughly dry. Now this step is optional, but I'm going to wrap the base of my box with some black cardstock, just because I don't want the raw edges of chipboard to show, or if I have any glue overruns that don't look too nice, I'd like to cover those up. But if you did a better job of gluing than I did, and the edges don't matter to you because it will be inside when the lid is on, then you can skip this step. But anyway, here we go. So I've cut some lengths of black cardstock, and I've cut these 3 inches wide, and I'm going to do some scoring at 3/8 of an inch. That'll be my bottom tab. And then I'm going to come up 2 1/8 from that, so that would be at 2 1/2. That's for the side. Then I'll go at 2 5/8. That'll make an 1/8 inch channel that'll go around the top edge of the box, leaving us with a 3/8 inch tab, which can fold to the inside. So I'll do that on the lengths of cardstock that I need to wrap around my box. And then for the front and the back, I want to kind of roughly center it. It doesn't have to be exact, but just so I don't have a seam in the front and the back, whatever my length of my box is, which in my case was 7 1/2, I'll subtract that from 12, which gives me 4 1/2, divide that in 2, which gives me 2 1/4. So I'll score it 2 1/4, and then I'll come 7 1/2 up from that, which would be 9 3/4, and that'll give me some nice scores to bend around the front edges or the back edges of the box. So I'll just do that on 2 of my pieces. So this is one of my front or back pieces, and you can see I've prepped it with some 1/4" score tape on all 4 edges. I've creased and used my bone folder on the tabs as well as this channel that's up here at the top. And then I want to do a little cutting out, and you can wait to do this till you put it on the box, but it depends on what you think is easier. On the bottom tab, I'm just going to cut a 45-degree miter for both of these corners, and then up on the top I'll cut a 45-degree miter, but it will only go in the channel, and then once I hit the tab I'm going to come pretty much straight out. So I'll do that cutting and then I'll show you what it looks like. So here's my piece with my cutouts. Here on the bottom tab you can see I've got the 2 miters cut, and then up here on the top I think you can see that I've got a miter cut in the channel, and then it comes out, and I would say it's not exactly straight. I've tapered it a little bit away from the miters just so that I'll have some ease when I go to put the corners on there. I've prepped the box with some 1/4" score tape that goes all around the 2 edges, and then a little piece on each of the sides here, so that the sides will be anchored, the corners will be anchored down as well. So then I can just start by removing some of that score tape. I'll put this piece on the sides first and then come back and fasten my tabs, and I'll do the front and the back and then measure to see what I need to fit into the sides there. So now I have my sides all covered with black cardstock. It's a little hard to see because I have the black chipboard, but they're all covered. On the sides I just filled in these pieces around 5/8 of an inch. The 2 sides were not exactly the same. I cut them exactly to fit. You can have it overlap if you want. Just make sure that in the next step that when you measure on the widest part of the box. And it's a good idea to test the fit of your mini at this point and make sure that it will easily come in and out. Now we're ready to measure and cut the pieces for the box lid, and we'll start out by measuring the width. I want to allow an extra 1/8 of an inch, so I'm letting my ruler overhang by an 1/8 of an inch on my left side here, and then that's going to be 5 1/8. And then for the length, I'll again let my ruler overhang an 1/8 of an inch on the left, and that's going to be 7 5/8. And my height is 2 1/8. So again, we want to increase these measurements to get to our base by a 1/4 inch each, since I'm doubling my chipboard, and my chipboard measures a 1/16 of an inch thick. So 5 1/8 plus a 1/4 is going to be 5 3/8, and 7 5/8 plus a 1/4 will be 7 7/8. And then for my long side, I'll cut that 2 1/8 tall, and I'll cut it by that original length, 7 5/8, because I'll inset it in between the shorter sides which I'll cut to be the same length of the base, which is 5 3/8. And I need 4 of each of these sides and 2 of that base. So that's what I need for the box lid. I'm also going to put a frame around the top, so instead of having just 2 pieces that are 5 3/8 by 7 7/8, I'm going to cut 4 pieces, and out of 2 of those I'll make a frame, which I'll show in a few minutes. Here are the 2 pieces that I cut with the frames, and they started out the same size as the base of the lid, and I just drew a line 3/4 of an inch all the way around and cut on that to create the frame. And then I put one on top of the other and traced around it, so just in case I had any variation, I would end up getting 2 that were just the same. So I'll put some glue and glue these 2 together, but I will not attach it to the base yet. For the gears, I'm using Tim Holtz Gadget Gears number 2, and I found it important to use this one because of the way the teeth are oriented. They will easily turn. Now you may have good luck with other gear dies that I'm not familiar with. Feel free to experiment. But I know that these 3 will interlock and they will turn, and it works very nicely. So in order to get enough depth to make sure that they keep turning, it's best to have 3 of each size. Here's one you can see. If I hold it over here, it's about 3/16 of an inch thick or so, because I'm using 16th inch chipboard. So this is a cut. I cut them out of medium weight chipboard, which is about 1/16 of an inch thick. And so for each of the gears, we want to cut 2 without decorative paper, and then for the third one, put decorative paper on it first before you cut it out, so that your top gear will be pretty. And then I'm going to elevate with a second gear on top of both the medium-sized one and the small one. So I'm going to cut an extra out of still matte medium weight chipboard of the medium and small, again first adding my decorative paper on top. And you can cut them out of either black or craft, whatever chipboard you like to use. I use wet glue to attach my 3 layers of chipboard together, and that gives me a little bit of wiggle room, because it's very important to get all 3 layers aligned exactly. And speaking of that, the dies, at least what I've seen, are not perfectly symmetrical, so make sure that you try it in several positions to make sure that you get it lined up correctly, so that all 3 layers are lined up and all the teeth match up, etc. And then allow those to dry. You can put them under some weight if you want to, so that you have all 3 gears with 3 layers to begin with. So now that we have our 3 base gears layered up, we can work on our arrangement of them. So normally I would put my frame down here to help with placement, but I've cut one out of just some cardstock just so it'd be easier to see where the edges are for you. And so these gears, when they go in, the teeth should not quite touch the next gear. You can kind of put them in any kind of alignment that is pleasing to you, so that a tooth on each of the big gears, the bigger gear, goes into a space on a smaller gear. And once you get an arrangement that you like, we're going to mark for the big hole here, and punch that first. And we'll do them in order. So we're just going to mark the center of this big one, and then I'm going to punch it with the biggest hole on my big bite. I know it's not quite big enough, it's only 3/16 an inch, but I'll take my craft knife and enlarge it a little bit afterwards. So I'm just going to mark that center, and the big bite will go through 2 layers of this 1/16 inch chipboard. And so I'm going to mark the first hole for the big gear, punch it, and then I'll be back. So once you have your hole, and you only want to make it just big enough for this 1/4 inch dowel to fit in. It should fit in there very snugly. And so I've just put a length in here that's about 2 inches to start with. And I'm going to drop my big gear on top. Now I'm going to put my other 2 gears back in place in where I wanted them to be. And once I have them in the place that I want them to be, I'm going to just take the little one off for a minute. And I'm just looking at this spacing right here. And what I'll do is just take, this is a 3/16 inch dowel, and I put it in the middle of my medium-sized one, and I'm just turning the big one to make sure that that's going to turn properly. Everything looks fine. It's not getting hung up at all. The teeth look like they're meeting well. So now I'll put, without taking my hand off the dowel, I'll put my fingers on the gear and mark the center there and punch a 3/16 inch hole for that. Now is the time when it starts being critical that you punch that hole exactly where the center of that gear is. I think you can see how I lengthened my lines here so I would be able to see really well to line up that hole and get it correctly punched. So now I've just got a little length of 3/16 inch dowel that I'll put down in that hole, and then drop my medium-sized gear on there, and now they're both turning very well. So now it's time to repeat that process for this 3rd gear. Get it in the place that you want it to be. Remember, there should just be a little bit of space here in between the end of the tooth and the edge of the gear. So I've marked placement for this gear, and I'll go ahead and again punch a 3/16 inch hole with my big bite. So now I have the hole for my smallest gear punched, and I'll put in another little length of 3/16 inch dowel and drop that gear on. And now all 3 should move either way you turn it. That's the nice thing about this gears too, is that it does this. It opens up a lot of possibilities with these gears. So you may be happy with the gears all just being at one level, and that's all you have, and if so, that's just fine. But I'm going to elevate and have another level on my small gear and my medium-sized gear. And the big gear I'm not, because I'm going to put a handle on that to turn the whole operation. So I think you can see here, because it's a little bit different color, there's some little rings here, and there's a thickness to this of 2 pieces of medium weight chipboard. I know it's kind of hard to see, but how I created those were, these are the little cutouts that come from the middle of the big gear, and I just have it on a post-it note so I can hold on to it, and I'm going to mark a center. These I think are about 1/2 inch. Got kind of a dirty template here, but it'll work. And I'll just use my ruler and the marks on here to mark a center in here, and then layer it up. 2 layers thick will go through my big punches here. And for you want to use your 1/4 inch punch and punch a hole. And when you do this, you want to have a significant difference between the height of these two elevated gears so that they don't bump into each other. So maybe you have 2 thicknesses or 3 thicknesses on the small one, and then you bump up the other one so that there's at least 1/8 of an inch difference in the height. You can test it on there and just see if there's any danger of them bumping into each other. So just another thing you can use if you don't want to go through this, if you've got one of the tags dies, it'll make those little cutouts that go around the holes for a tag. And as long as you've got one where the hole is a 1/4 inch, and this isn't much bigger than a 1/2 inch wide, those would work as well, so you don't have to go through it, especially if you don't have a 1/4 inch punch. So I'm going to cut a bunch of these little dudes like that and try it out, and then I'll be back. So for my little one, you might be able to see this. I've got a couple layers here, so it's about 1/8 of an inch thick, and I've already glued it to one side of my top gear. And again, I'll want to make sure that this lines up, even though it's not as critical because it's not going to actually be engaging. It'll still look better if it's aligned properly. And make sure you keep glue out of that central hole. You can use, this hole is bigger than your 3/8 inch dowel, so if you're concerned about is it aligned or not, you can put it on there, but make sure you don't get it attached to it. And then for my medium-sized, this one is quite a bit thicker. You can see it's probably twice as thick. It's about 1/4 of an inch with all its little layers. And I just used on both of them my black Copic marker to darken the edges so they wouldn't be as noticeable. So I'll put both of those spacers and get these in my stacks, and then I'll be back. So once you have your elevated gears attached, drop them in place and just test and make sure. There should be no reason for anything not to work, but go ahead and test it. I'll just bring it up here so you can kind of see those elevated gears a little bit. Now we need some little stoppers that will eventually go on the top of our dowels to make sure the gears don't come off. And so I've again doubled up the little chipboard circles that came out of the cutting the dies here, and you can always cut another one if you've run out of little circles or do something else. And we need one with a 1/4 inch hole that will go on the 1/4 inch dowel, and then 2 of them that have a 3/16 inch hole that will fit right on those 3/16, and they need to fit tight. That's why we're cutting them to those dimensions, because the stoppers don't, they get glued to the post to stop the gears from going off. They don't need to turn freely. So I'll get those little stoppers punched. So here are my 3 little stoppers cut. And then out of some scrap medium weight chipboard, these pieces are probably about 3/4 of an inch square and 1 inch square. It's not critical. The smaller ones have a 3/16 inch hole in them, and the bigger one has a 1/4 inch hole. And I'm just going to use those underneath this top piece, just so that when we glue the dowels in, it'll give us that much more gluing surface to attach the dowels. And then I'm going to turn this gear assembly with Tim Holtz knob here. But in order to do that, we need to have it get some bearing on the gear and avoid the post in the center. So the way I figured out to do that is to cut some donut shapes out of chipboard. And I have this die, Sizzix die, it's called Circles number 4. And in Circles number 4, there's a 5/8 inch circle, that's the inside, and a 1 inch circle. So what I did was I just cut some scrap pieces of chipboard. And you can see I wasn't always exactly perfect, but try to get it as close as you can. And punch the 5/8 inch first and then center that on the 1 inch and cut out the 1 inch so you get these donut shapes. And then this is just a 1 inch circle that in the very center I punched with the 1/8 inch side of the crocodile. Now it may take another one of these donuts, I'm not quite sure. Now if you don't have this die, you can accomplish the same kind of thing with lightweight chipboard. You'll just need to make several more, twice as many layers by cutting out with a 5/8 inch circle punch in the middle, and then cutting the outside with a 1 inch circle punch, because most of the punches will go through lightweight chipboard, and then you can just stack up all those layers. So I think we have all of the pieces and parts we need. If not, I'll come back and we'll make what we're missing.